What if I told you that some of your favorite childhood cartoons from the 1980s wouldn't survive a single broadcast today? Back then, Saturday mornings were pure chaos heroes, mutants, and misfits all jammed into one lineup. But the world has changed, and so have the rules. From bizarre plots to wild moral lessons, these shows went places modern networks wouldn't dare touch again. Mighty Mouse, The New Adventures, 1987 to 88. When animation legend Ralph Bakshi teamed up with John Kricfalusi to reboot a wholesome classic, nobody expected Mighty Mouse, The New Adventures to explode into controversy. The series was edgy, self-aware, and packed with surreal humor that mocked Saturday morning conventions. But the biggest shock came when one scene showed Mighty Mouse sniffing a crushed flower, a blink and you'll miss it gag that ignited headlines across the country. Critics accused the show of inappropriate symbolism, while Bakshi defended it as innocent. CBS panicked, re-edited the episode, and issued statements assuring parents there was nothing sinister. Yet the debate revealed just how far the show had gone from its simple roots. It tackled big ideas like censorship, celebrity obsession, and even corporate greed, all within bright, zany storylines that felt like a fever dream. What made Mighty Mouse special was its rebellion. It mocked its own sponsors, poked fun at television executives, and treated kids like they could handle satire. Every frame felt unpredictable, loaded with quick gags and visual humor that only older audiences might truly catch. Today, the same network notes that children's standards have evolved, meaning this blend of meta-humor and risk-taking would likely be flagged long before airing. Still, Mighty Mouse. The New Adventures inspired an entire generation of animators who later created shows like Ren and Stimpy and Animaniacs. It may not fit the clean-cut image of modern cartoons, but its boldness proved one thing. Sometimes, it takes a flying mouse with attitude to push animation into the future. Inhumanoids, 1986. If you think cartoons were only about cheerful heroes and safe adventures, Inhumanoids would prove you wrong in the first 5 minutes. Created by Sunbow Productions, the same studio behind Transformers and G.I. Joe. This show wasn't afraid to dive into genuine nightmare fuel. It told the story of EarthCore, a team of scientists battling monstrous creatures from deep within the planet. But unlike other toy-based cartoons, Inhumanoids leaned heavily into horror. The monsters weren't just villains. They were terrifying, decaying giants with names like Metlar and Decompose. Decompose, for instance, could touch humans and turn them into skeletal zombies. For an 80s kid, that image stuck. Even the heroes wore claustrophobic, coffin-like suits, and the show used eerie music more fitting for a late-night thriller than a Saturday morning cartoon. Despite being designed to sell toys, Inhumanoids went all in on macabre storytelling. It featured betrayal, imprisonment, and even implied doom for entire cities, all within a kid-friendly time slot. Parents groups quickly raised alarms, claiming the imagery was far too frightening for children. Local stations began quietly dropping it, and by the end of its brief run, Inhumanoids had gained a reputation as one of the most intense cartoons ever broadcast. Today, it feels more like an animated horror series than a commercial for action figures. With its dark tone and grim visuals, Inhumanoids stands as proof that the 80s were a very different time when toy companies thought kids could handle just about anything. Watching it now, you realize why no modern network would take the risk. But for fans of weird, wild nostalgia, it remains a forgotten gem hiding in the dark corners of animation history. Rambo, The Force of Freedom, 1986. You read that right. They turned Rambo, the gritty film icon, from an adults-only franchise into a children's cartoon. Rambo, The Force of Freedom, followed the same muscle-bound hero, now softened into a patriotic action leader, saving the world one episode at a time. Instead of quiet tragedy or emotional trauma, this version of Rambo delivered motivational speeches and lesson-of-the-day pep talks to his team. It was pure 80s energy, big vehicles, wild missions, and an over-the-top villain group known as SAVAGE, the show. Was produced by Ruby Spears and aired in syndication, meaning it played across multiple local stations. Kids loved it at first, after all. Rambo was larger than life, but adults couldn't believe it was real. Critics wondered why anyone thought adapting a movie about war for kids was a smart move. Even toned down, the series still had intense moments. Explosions filled every episode, and the pacing rarely stopped for breath. Rambo became a one-man rescue squad, saving scientists, towns, or even environmental activists from the bad guys. The irony was impossible to miss. a hero known for emotional depth reduced to a moral of the day figure. Today, it's almost unthinkable that a show like this would be marketed to children. Networks now avoid connecting any youth programming to mature film franchises. Yet, Rambo, the force of freedom, perfectly captured what made the 80s so unapologetic. Everything was bigger, louder, and too wild to question. Looking back, it feels like a fever dream of flag-waving optimism and misplaced inspiration. But there's no denying it's a fascinating time capsule of when TV thought anything could be made kid-friendly, even Rambo. Chuck Norris, Karate Commandos, 1986. If Rambo seemed like an odd fit for children's animation, Chuck Norris, Karate Commandos took that idea and sprinted even further. Produced by Ruby Spears, this short-lived series starred real-life martial artist Chuck Norris as an animated version of himself, leading a team of young fighters against cartoonish villains with names like The Claw. The idea was simple: blend martial arts, adventure, and positive morals. The result? A show that now feels like pure 80s exaggeration. Each episode opened with live-action footage of Norris himself, giving a brief pep talk about courage or respect. Then the cartoon would take off filled with outrageous fight scenes, daring escapes, and endless lessons about honor. The pacing was fast, the villains were over the top, and every punch was followed by a moral message. Parents initially praised the attempt to mix action with values, but it didn't take long for concerns to arise. Some critics argued that the show glorified aggression despite its good intentions. Others felt it was too promotional, turning Chuck Norris into an unstoppable superhero who could never lose. The irony of watching kids idolize a real person, portrayed as an invincible cartoon hero, wasn't lost on viewers. Despite lasting only 5 episodes, it developed a cult following thanks to reruns and VHS releases. Today, Karate Commandos stands as a perfect snapshot of the era's extremes. It wanted to inspire children, but did it through relentless spectacle. The blend of moral lessons and exaggerated heroism would be considered far too self-promotional now. But in the world of the 1980s, Chuck Norris wasn't just a man, he was a brand, and his animated alter ego proved that even good intentions can look wild through the lens of nostalgia. Robocop, the animated series, 1988. There's a certain irony in turning one of the most intense films of the decade into a Saturday morning cartoon. Yet, in the late 1980s, Robocop, the animated series, did exactly that. Based loosely on the famous movie about a half-human, half-machine law enforcer in a futuristic city, the show tried to transform gritty satire into kid-friendly storytelling. But beneath the bright colors and simplified villains, you could still feel the darkness lurking just below the surface. Produced by Marvel Productions, the cartoon toned down nearly everything from the film. The city was less corrupt, the corporations less ruthless, and the title hero far more approachable. Instead of moral ambiguity, each episode revolved around classic good versus evil plots, where Robocop and his team saved civilians or foiled comically bad villains with obvious motives. Even so, the series retained a sense of melancholy. The hero's mechanical loneliness and tragic backstory were impossible to completely erase. Parents and critics were puzzled. Why adapt a story originally meant for grown-ups into something for children? The contrast was jarring. Kids cheered for Robocop's cool gadgets while adults remembered the disturbing tone of the original movie. Despite decent animation and a heroic message about justice, the series struggled to find its audience. It lasted just 1 season, quietly fading away as networks realized its concept was too complex for children and too tame for older fans. Today, Robocop, the animated series, feels like a fascinating experiment, an era when television executives believed any blockbuster could become family entertainment. It's not offensive or graphic, just strangely misplaced. Watching it now, you can't help but marvel at how fearlessly the 80s tried to mix opposites: heart and hardware, tragedy and toy shelves. It's a relic of a time when nothing was too strange to try. Cops 1988 to 89. 1988 to 89. Before the word reboot became common, COPS was already ahead of the curve, an animated show imagining law enforcement in the year 2020. It was meant to be futuristic, high-tech, and full of lessons about bravery and teamwork. Instead, it became one of the most over-the-top, adrenaline-fueled cartoons ever produced for kids. The full title, Central Organization of Police Specialists, sounded serious, but what viewers got was part science fiction, part comic book chaos. Produced by DIC Entertainment, the The series featured larger-than-life heroes with colorful nicknames: Longarm, Bulletproof, and Mace, just to name a few. Each had unique abilities, gadgets, and vehicles that could rival any superhero show. The villains were equally flamboyant, with characters like Big Boss and Buttons McBoom Boom. Yes, really. The show's tagline summed up the vibe perfectly. It's crime fighting. Time. Despite its energetic charm, COPS eventually drew criticism for its heavy reliance on non-stop action and exaggerated portrayals of justice. The idea of turning law enforcement into an action spectacle felt harmless then, but would raise eyebrows now. Many of the character designs and storylines borrowed from comic book extremes, often blurring the line between parody and glorification. Still, it wasn't all flash. The series tried, in its own way, to promote teamwork and fairness, but it also embodied that classic 80s excess every problem could be solved with a gadget, a chase, or a punchline. Modern viewers might find it dated, but it's a fascinating time capsule. Watching COPS now feels like opening a neon-colored comic strip from another dimension, a reminder that, in the 80s, even the future looked loud, bold, and a little too confident for its own good. Police Academy, the animated series, 1988 to 89. If COPS was a wild comic book fantasy, Police Academy, the animated series was its slapstick cousin, chaotic, goofy, and proudly ridiculous. Based on the movie franchise famous for its bumbling recruits and sound effect humor, the cartoon version brought the same energy to kids' TV. It ran for an impressive 65 episodes, making it one of the longest-lasting shows on this list. But what it got away with back then would never fly today. The cartoon kept familiar faces from the movies: Mahoney, Tackleberry, Jones, and the rest of the squad. Each episode followed their misadventures as they fought cartoonish criminals or tried to prove themselves at the academy. The humor was constant pratfalls, explosions, exaggerated characters, and gags that often leaned on stereotypes now considered outdated. It was all meant to be silly, and it succeeded, but subtlety wasn't part of its vocabulary. Behind the laughter, the show mirrored the anything-goes tone of 80s entertainment. The police were always lovable, the criminals always absurd, and the message was simple: chaos is funny. In a modern context, that one-note portrayal would likely feel offbeat or tone-deaf. Networks today prefer more balanced storytelling and diverse perspectives. Yet, it's impossible not to appreciate how committed Police Academy, the animated series, was to its own brand of fun. It knew what it was, a cartoon spin-off of a grown-up comedy, and never tried to be more. Watching it now feels like time traveling to an era when absurdity ruled Saturday mornings, and every joke was louder than the last. It's a relic of carefree chaos that could only have been born in the 80s. Brave Star, 1987 to 88. Imagine a futuristic western where a Native American lawman rides a talking cyber horse across alien deserts. That's Brave Star. Produced by Filmation, the studio behind He-Man, this series took the spirit of the Wild West and rocketed it into space. Its hero, Marshall Brave Star, protected the planet New Texas with the help of mystical animal powers like Eyes of the Hawk and Strength of the Bear. It was wildly ambitious, mixing sci-fi, frontier justice, and moral lessons into one colorful package. But Brave Star was also surprisingly serious for a children's show. It tackled issues like greed, bullying, and responsibility. The most infamous episode, The Price, went even further. It showed the tragic outcome of a young character's addiction to an unnamed substance. The episode was meant to warn kids about temptation, but its grim tone shocked parents. No one expected a Saturday morning cartoon to deal with death so directly. The series had heart, no doubt about it, but its themes and imagery would likely raise eyebrows today. From cultural depictions to darker moral choices, Brave Star walked a line modern networks wouldn't dare cross. Yet, it was progressive in its own way. The hero was brave, spiritual, and grounded in respect for nature and community, a refreshing change from the era's usual muscle-bound leads. Even though it ended after one season, Brave Star remains a standout relic of the late 80s. It dared to blend genres and emotions long before animation got mature. Looking back, it feels like a series caught between two worlds, part toy commercial, part moral fable, and its bravery, both literal and creative, is what makes it unforgettable. Dungeons & Dragons, 1983 to 85. Few cartoons captured the imagination of 80s kids quite like Dungeons & Dragons. Based on the tabletop role-playing phenomenon, it followed 6 friends who get sucked into a fantasy realm and must find their way home. Guided by the cryptic dungeon master, They faced monsters, sorcery, and moral dilemmas every week. It was epic, emotional, and sometimes surprisingly dark. But in the 80s, Dungeons & Dragons found itself at the center of massive controversy. During the height of fantasy panic, some parents believed the show promoted dangerous ideas. Networks defended it as fantasy adventure, but the tension grew. Ironically, Dungeons & Dragons was one of the most morally upright shows on television. It emphasized teamwork, compassion, and courage. Each episode ended with a clear lesson about using intelligence and heart over aggression. Still, the atmosphere of fear eventually led to its quiet cancellation. The final episode, Requiem, was written but never animated, leaving the story unfinished for decades. The show's legacy, however, never died. It inspired video games, fan art, and even a cameo in the 2023 Dungeons & Dragons movie. Rewatching it now, you realize how advanced it was for its time. Its writing respected children's intelligence, weaving emotional depth into high adventure. Yet the cultural climate of the 80s wasn't ready for that complexity. Today, Dungeons & Dragons would likely thrive on streaming platforms, but in its own decade, it was the misunderstood pioneer that proved fantasy could be both thrilling and thoughtful. Turbo Teen, 1984. Some cartoons from the 80s were daring. Others were just bizarre. Turbo Teen was both. The premise: a teenage boy named Brett Matthews merges with his car during a laboratory experiment gone wrong. When he gets hot, he transforms into a red sports car. When he cools down, he turns back into a human. Yes, you heard that right. It's part superhero story, part unintentional comedy, and all pure 80s madness. Produced by Ruby Spears, the show combined elements of Knight Rider and the Incredible Hulk, but the transformations were unsettling. Every episode featured a morphing sequence that made kids gasp and adults blink twice. Despite the absurd premise, the stories were straightforward. Brett and his friends solved mysteries, chased criminals, and tried to keep his condition secret. The concept was weirdly sincere, which made it even more memorable. The creators clearly meant well, trying to explore the theme of identity and control, but the execution was so over the top, it became legendary for all the wrong reasons. Today, Turbo Teen lives on as a cult favorite, mostly shared online for its "what were they thinking" factor. Modern networks would never approve a show with such a strange transformation and sequence, or unintentionally unsettling imagery. Yet, it represents something special about the 80s, a time when creativity had no brakes. Turbo Teen might be absurd, but it's also a reminder that sometimes the strangest ideas make the strongest memories. Defenders of the Earth, 1986. Before shared cinematic universes became a trend, Defenders of the Earth brought together an all-star team of comic strip heroes: Flash Gordon, the Phantom, Mandrake the Magician, and their children. Set in the 21st century, they joined forces to fight the villainous Ming the Merciless. The animation was slick, the music heroic, and the cast iconic. It should have been a perfect formula, but time hasn't been kind to it. The show had style, but it also carried the stereotypes of its era. Ming's design, inspired by outdated pulp imagery, has since been widely criticized. The show's tone, though adventurous, reflected a simpler view of heroism that modern audiences might find one-dimensional. Still, its energy was unmatched. The voice acting and storytelling leaned into grand adventure, giving viewers a sense of cinematic scale rarely seen in weekday cartoons. Defenders of the Earth wasn't meant to offend. It was trying to honor classic heroes from the early days of comic history. Yet, its depiction of certain cultures and the good versus evil approach feel dated by today's standards. What's fascinating is how earnest it was. Its creators truly believed they were making a show about teamwork, legacy, and courage. Looking back, it's both a time capsule and a warning of how quickly media evolves. What once looked noble and bold now feels frozen in another era. Still, Defenders of the Earth deserves credit for ambition. It dared to unite legends before anyone had even heard the term crossover event. Garbage Pail Kids, 1987. Imagine a cartoon so wild that entire television stations refused to air it before the first episode even premiered. That's Garbage Pail Kids, a spin-off of the trading card phenomenon that mixed gross humor, chaotic plots, and a total disregard for good taste. Inspired by the parody cards mocking Cabbage Patch Kids, each character had some over-the-top quirk: oozing slime, exploding heads, or body-based gags that would never pass today's broadcast standards. The animation itself was surprisingly polished for a show designed to shock. Episodes featured misfit kids facing everyday problems like friendship or fitting in, but solving them through gleefully disgusting antics. One moment they'd be moralizing about self-acceptance, the next, launching someone into a garbage truck. Critics called it tasteless. Parents called it dangerous for kids. CBS agreed, canceling it before it even aired in America, though it found life overseas. The real controversy wasn't just the visuals, it was the tone. The show turned rebellion into a brand, teaching kids to laugh at authority and hygiene alike. In today's sanitized, lesson-heavy children's programming, something like Garbage Pail Kids would be instantly pulled or reimagined as a satire for adults. Yet, for many 80s kids, that short-lived chaos became a badge of honor, a reminder that cartoons once dared to be weird, unapologetic, and gleefully messy. 80s cartoons were bold, bizarre, and totally unfiltered, a mix of creativity and chaos we'll never see again. Watching them now feels like glimpsing a world before rules caught up with imagination. Some still charm us, others make us wonder, how did this ever air? Which one do you remember most? Share your favorite below, and subscribe for more lost treasures of retro animation.